So let's see, I've actually never worked for a large company, so I'm usually have joined them very early. So I joined Mozilla when it was 20 people. I spent most of my career getting people to join startups and figuring out which people not to waste time on trying to get to join startups. And so like you figure out what questions to ask to help kind of get them into the right place. And then most of my 7 years at Greylock and with me and my team was helping to facilitate a marketplace, which basically you're talking to people that have been in the same job for a long time, and then you're asking them a subset of questions to figure out where is it that you should recommend, because we have 50 companies in the portfolio, and you don't want to send them 50 companies, you want to send them 2 or 3. And so you need to basically understand their risk profile and what they're looking for, and not what this next job is, but what does 2 or 3 jobs down the road mean. And so helping them think through the decision of like what matters to them, and not everyone spends time thinking about what questions to ask themselves. In a lot of ways, like we learn about it through trial and error. And so, Wade and I have gotten to know each other pretty well, like through Talent Partner, which is a Greylock portfolio company, and we did a podcast together, which ended up with 2 podcasts. We sat down for like 3 hours talking, which was a lot of fun. So we won't hold you up for 3 hours tonight, but. I guess to start, of like, since most people learn by trial and error, like what was have you made a mistake in joining a company, and should you have known kind of what mistakes, could you have read the tea leaves a little bit better?
We're just going straight there.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Truth is like I've made a couple of like meaningful mistakes in companies that I've joined. The worst, though, I would say, was when I decided to leave Opsware. You probably know about Opsware. I think you were at a company that was a competitor. What happened there? Never mind.
I got bought by Sun, which no one knows what that is.
Anyhow, and while at Opsware, like we did a lot of really cool things, and we had a lot of hard challenges, and you can read Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, to read a lot about that. I was his VP of engineering at the time, and I started doing a little bit of side thing of like helping to be a technical advisor and helping companies move forward. And there was this one company that needed some help, and I was like, yeah, let me help. And I was just very agreeable to try and help things move forward. And I would go in and I would talk to the founder, and we would get things straightened out, and he would move forward, and then I would come back like 4 to 6 weeks later, and it was all screwed up. And it was just like, just focus on these things. These things matter. Like, pay attention to this. Like, do this. And then he would focus on it, and it would start to go well, and then it would fall apart. And then he's like, Wade, you should just come here and run engineering, right? Like, you should just do this. And I'm like, yeah, no, I should just do this because you're screwing it up. It was totally ego. It was like the thing of, playing to me and my ability to help and all of those things, which are not bad things, right? Like, none of that is bad. But if I was going to turn it around, it's like I think that almost every decision you make should be put through an expected value calculation, right? It's like, what do I need to learn? Where do I need to grow? Like, what's the thing that is going to help my career move forward? What are the experiences that I need access to? What's the coaching and the mentoring that I need to be able to unlock that? What's the strength of the people that I'm going to be working with? Like, all of those things matter greatly. And there was none of those things that really existed at this company. As a result, 3 months in, the board fired the CEO, right? And then I was sort of holding the reins for a while and like trying to keep the company afloat while we found a new CEO. And then I felt obliged to like stay in pocket while that new CEO got his feet underneath him. And so like 18 months in, right, in a company that I knew like on week 3, this was the wrong thing for me. And it was all because I was not processing like what the expected value was for my career, for the outcomes, for the things that would be necessary for it to be a successful relationship. And as a result, right, like I still look back and it's like, yeah, I could have saw that coming, right? It's just like, think a little bit harder about it.
I mean, it's an interesting thing to look about, like what should you get out of it? And every year I talk to new grads, so I built Mozilla's new grad program, and the person that ran that for us helps all of our companies set up their, or I still say ours, not a Greylock anymore. But like I always enjoy having the conversation with people that are graduating college for the first time. They're graduating college and they're getting their first job. And so they're trying to make a decision, and they're trying to figure out the set of things that they should value. And so part of that is like, how do you kind of create a framework for decision making? And so I don't know if you have some ideas or things you want to suggest on like, how do you actually make that like framework? And then so thinking part about what is the risk reward return, but mostly like, how do you actually make decisions, and how does that framework shift when you're young and just getting started versus when you're much later in your career?
The interesting thing is, like, I think the thinking through it as expected value like stays consistent. But I think that as you go through your career, like things change. First, like I talk to a lot of people that think that I want to make money, right? Like I'm going to go get friggin' filthy rich. Right, like I am going to go to a startup and it is going to kill, and I am just going to, from that point forward, work's going to be sort of an optional thing. It doesn't work that way. Like I wish it did. I wish I could just tell everybody here, run wildly into the night and go find your best startup, and like that's a thing. If the stats are true, like 99 out of 100 are going to fail. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, right? Like I just would say, make that a number 2 criteria. The real thing is like, what do you, if you were going to say, and I know this is somewhat cliche, but like if you were going to fast forward your career like 3 to 5 years, what does that look like? What are you trying to accomplish? Based on that, if the 70-20-10 rule holds up on learning, and that 70% of how you learn is like practicing something, 20% is like who do you have access to that's mentoring and coaching you through that, then like figuring out that next step that you're going to take and the opportunity that it's going to afford you to practice it by working with somebody who's going to be able to help you get through that, right? Like that matters a lot. And so I think that as you're looking at like those opportunities, I think those are a lot of what you should be looking at to figure out, is this a thing that's going to causally help me to be better at what I do? I also think that experiences, the network that you build, honestly, right? Like I can say, sitting here today, I cannot remember the last time that I went and looked for a job. Actually, I can't, because I was an executive in residence at Greylock, and like I talked to a lot of people. But even the job that I ended up choosing was somebody who reached out through a network and like found me. And so that idea that doing your job well and having that network of people around you, like ultimately helps rise the tide for your personal stuff. Parking that off to the side for 1 second, the one thing I would put out there is like Wealthfront puts out an article that's like the top companies that will launch your career, and actually think they have very objective criteria about if you're going to look at a startup, and as a secondary consideration, what makes for a successful outcome associated with those companies. I think there's a lot of wisdom in how they look at it. Oh, and you asked about later in life. There's a thing, right? Like as you get in, and I have a 16-year-old, and he's starting to look at schools and things along those lines. And he wants to go to Michigan or UT Austin, or pick different places. Those are expensive. And so as I look at it, my earnings need to pay for a lot of those things where we're at right now. And so, right, like you have to take that into consideration of, if you go to a startup, they are probably not flush with cash and able to like pay at the extreme top end of it. And so you'd better be doing it for other reasons. And there can be some cases where like park your butt, right? Like go do the work. Go figure out like how to be successful in the company that's going to help you get through a particular point in your life. And there's no reason to move away from that.
I mean, I think in the beginning you're doing a lot of investing in yourself, and so you're investing in yourself from and the thing that I kind of coach people on is from an experience level, which will come with time, with an expertise based upon the job that you do, and then the network. And so if I think about it very similar to you, like the very first company that I joined was a company called Zapplay, which no longer exists. And
It's an awesome company.
The first person I met was Josh McFarland, who you worked for as well, and so we ended up working together at Greylock. He actually introduced me to a bunch of people over the years, and then the company that competed with Wave was called Centerun, and it was a very tiny company, but one of those people was a guy named Mike Schrepfer, who's the CTO of Facebook, partner at Sequoia, this guy that runs Chronicle at Google, and it was this little tiny company that exited for $60 million to Sun, but like the value of that network has been amazing to me over the years. And so part of like no matter what you do, like picking to work with great people, whether it's like 5 people, 10 people, 50 or 300, like that's the most valuable thing that you can do for yourself. And as far as like picking a company, I think the various stages between like 10, 50, 100, Series A, seed, like that's a question of ambiguity and how much ambiguity are you willing to deal with. Because when you work at a big company, not that I've worked at someone, like the bigger the company, the more shit is done for you. So like you have recruiters that will drop people on your plate, like you have infrastructure that exists that allows you to make your job easier. The earlier you go, the more like you're responsible for owning the outcome. And so I don't know how do you think about like the various stages?
No, I think that's spot on, and not that my body type would show it, but like I think that if you think about big companies, it's about like lifting weights on a weight machine, right? It's very structured, right? Like you have things that fit into very clearly defined. It still makes you strong. Like you can still do real things there, but like now try and do that with dumbbells, free weights of where you can drop one directly on your nose.
Or people.
Or like you're trying to
Or
lift
people,
something
right?
that's squirming at the same time.
Exactly right. And so, the challenge there is like it builds up a lot of supporting muscle because there are so many needs that need to be met in a smaller company that, right, like you're going to get a chance to do a lot of different things. And you're going to be involved at a much earlier stage, right? Like all of those things that you take for granted about, as you were mentioning, right? Like what's the recruiting pipeline look like? At a startup, people may say like, yeah, where is your recruiting pipeline? What are you doing about that? Like who have you talked to recently? And you're like, oh, that's me. And then you talk to your friends that work at Google and they're talking about, oh yeah, we just launched another 10,000 nodes and we tried something out. It's a pretty good experiment, didn't work out. And you're like, 10,000, oh my God, that's crazy. And then you think about, we were talking about continuous deployment, and it's like, early on, it's a big monolith that you might try and blot out every 3 to 4 weeks, right? And you have to work your way up to where it actually works the way you think it should work. Like there are so many different aspects of how it should be, developed. And you have to think about like, I'm chief cook, bottle washer. Right, as a startup today, I was thinking about like strategic things. There's a couple of acquisitions that we have looked at, the architecture of the platform moving forward. And then I was also having one-on-ones with like very junior engineers about like how to grow their career, and also did a tech lead presentation of like, look, here's how you should be thinking about your career, right? Like each and every person who steps into a startup like that, a lot of that infrastructure doesn't exist. And it is incumbent upon you to like help create it, right? Like you just can't wonder when somebody's going to come in and provide these things for you. So like there's a lot of opportunity, but if you don't like doing that sort of thing, you are going to be irritated.
I mean, I think regardless of stage or size of the company, like the biggest thing to ask yourself is like, how well do I understand the job that I'm being asked to do? And for how long? I'm like, I know what needs to be done for the next week, 6 months, year, 2 years, 3 years. That's very different than like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I remember when I left Mozilla, I moved into an entirely different role. So I worked at this, like I was one of the first employees at a company called Rypple, those being building HR software. We ended up running all of like Facebook's performance reviews. And I was playing, like I had been head of recruiting, VP of HR, and so here I was helping with product pieces. I ran customer success. I did the rollout of Facebook. I was like doing videos to like train people on how to use a product. Like I was having panic attacks on like a nightly basis. And then what I learned about myself is that like I do not like being over my skis that much. And so I learned that like 70–80%, I like squarely down the middle. I know what I'm doing. I'm an expert at it. And then I have 20% of time to play and to experiment and to expand. Like I don't want to completely know everything that I need to do, but I need space. And so the more that you kind of understand how well that you as an individual will behave in some of these circumstances and how much autonomy that you can, how much ambiguity you're willing to deal with, the earlier of a company or the bigger the set of responsibilities that you can handle. And so if like you have no idea what's happening tomorrow and that excites you, then you're kind of ready for something a little bit earlier. If that gives you anxiety, then you might want to think a little bit differently about it.
Yeah, you definitely need to be comfortable with discomfort, right? Like if you're not, you're probably going to have a freak out session somewhere along these lines. Let's see, I've ran product management, support, engineering, ops, sales, right? Like almost every documentation, right? Like, and a lot of that is because there was no one else to be able to help move that forward. And so I'm sure I did a bad job at a lot of those things, but it was what was necessary to help the company succeed.
And so I think that's a really good point. We've had a lot of questions about like how do you pick startups, and we talked a lot about ambiguity. And so and it all goes back to like what are you willing to kind of put on your back from a startup perspective. And so part of that is like as a founder you have a certain set of responsibilities. As a founding engineer you have another. But like being able to kind of understand that ambiguity. And so from an evaluation perspective. So the set of things that I evaluate, I think the biggest thing for me is just the sheer quality of the people that I'm going to work with, and how much do I trust them. Like to me, fundamentally, trust is one of the biggest kind of things that to understand. Because if you there are plenty of spectacularly talented people, but if you do not trust them, like it is very hard to operate in that environment. But I wonder what other criteria you use to that.
I think there's a lot of that, like trust and competence are like the cornerstones of things. But ultimately, I think that principles and values come a lot into play as well, of where I like to try and work with somebody before I actually work with them, right? Like, can I go take on a project and think about it before I actually start the job? Can I go try and solve a problem with them? And like, I will purposely inject some tension into that to see how we're going to deal with something once it becomes heated, right? Like you're talking about years of your life, and you had better figure out like how you resolve issues. I wish somebody would give me this advice before I got married, right? But you'd better figure out how to resolve issues even before you have the issue. And so a lot about the principles of a person and what they value, like, will come out during those tense conversations. There was a thing that I think it's on there, is like, how do you know what it's like to work with a founder? Get them mad. That's what it's going to be like to work with that founder, because at that point, right, like you're going to figure out like what they're optimizing for and how to help drive through it. And founders are all over the map. And I mean that in a very positive way, right? Like there's founders out there that are nervous, it's their first time going through it, but they have this brilliant insight of what could be done and they need somebody to help channel that. In other cases, like there's more seasoned founders that have been there, done that, and they're probably going to take a more sane approach through this. There is no bad answer to all of that. The real thing is like, is this somebody you want to spend 14, 16 hours a day with, because you trust them, you believe they're competent, and you also share some values and principles along the way that you know when push comes to shove, that you're going to be like connect arms and actually walk through it.
I mean, I think one of the biggest things, one of the things I push people on to really understand is like, how do decisions get made in the organization? Because that will tell you a lot about the company. So in some cases, and it's okay, like whatever the framework is, but understanding that like it's consistent. Like I worked at, like with Mozilla, everything was done in the forums. Like you work with open source people, like everyone gets to provide input on whatever the fuck you're talking about. It gets really annoying, but you learn how to operate in that framework, which is say like, I need to make a decision. I have an idea of what I want to do. I put it into the forums. I solicit like feedback from the people that are doing, and then I can makes it really easy for making a decision. Ready? Bye. All right. And then so understanding like that's the framework for how things done, and then versus like the command and control CEO that will just make a decision and not tell anyone what's going on. Where like this new person just showed up, that's your new coworker, and no one in the entire company interviewed them. And so when you're joining a company, the more you understand about what is involved in decision making, and what are the inputs that go into that, then you'll understand if it's an organization that you can actually like, be a part of and function well in.
And pro tip on that. By the way, Jerry, he dropped the F-bomb first, so I'm fully entitled now, right? Like you will find strong founder-led companies that like are sort of benevolent dictatorship. When you don't have that, right, like there's an executive team that's like helping to drive things. Every time a new executive joins the team, you're going to go through that Tuckman model again, right? You're going to form, you're going to storm, you're going to norm, you're going to perform over time. Be comfortable with that, right? Like, that's a positive thing. There's a reason that you add new execs to the team and help it move through that cycle.
I mean, there's a question about like, how do you know if someone's like not a startup fit? And so part of it is like understanding or trying to get a sense of what does that person actually need to be successful? And so are they going to, like, are they willing to do the work that the job requires, or do they need a lot of hand-holding, whatever it may be, to kind of be successful in their role? So a lot of companies try to hire the person that's already done that job to do that job again. Guess what? No one wants to do the job that they already did. So you're either going to hire someone that is stepping up to do that job, or you're taking someone that has that experience and giving them more experience to do something a bit broader. And so you have to understand what that person's motivations and expectations and their ability to be successful in your environment. And so that requires a lot of conversation with them and also trying to understand like what their aspirations and motivations are.
Before we head off, like I love the question about how do you effectively transition from a founding engineering team to more sustainable. I think that every engineering leader should be looking at what's the performance of the team and what's the potential of the team from a talent, a process and tools, from a clarity of all of the information necessary to make a decision, down to performance, the get shit done, shit that matters, to engagement, to leadership, et cetera. And you constantly need to be retooling that based on what the company needs over the next 12 to 18 months. And so hopefully as an engineering leader, you're constantly looking at where we're at, having those conversations so that everybody knows it as well. If you have a bunch of cowboys up front that are helpful to get the product market fit established, right, that will probably change. It's nice to see Zuck talk about move fast with stable infrastructure, right? That's a change that he had to go through. And the more vocal you are about it and upfront about it, the easier that transition is. And I think that the founding engineers will understand that as well as if it's just upfront and being talked about.
And I know we're almost done, but I will say that to people that are looking to join a startup or figuring out what that means, and don't just think about this next job that you're taking, but what does that mean for a longer time horizon? Is this like, what is like this job and my next job and the job after that mean for me? And it all might be at the same company. Like you might be able to kind of progress through all of those things in one company. But like understanding ultimately where you want to be, and the investments from a expertise, experience, and network. And like those are the set of three things that you invest in yourself. And so understanding that in this job, I am getting this skill, and that gets me to this next level, and in that job, I want this skill. And so like ultimately, whether my goal is to be a founder or an executive, that I'm investing in myself now and deferring like the instant gratification of money, which is hard to do in Silicon Valley, but like understanding that it's a much longer game.
The only thing I would add on top of that is if you want to be one of those people, that whatever your role is, right? Like I love Ray Dalio's thoughts about believable sources. Go find the people who can effectively coach you because they've done it well before and can explain how they did it. And you are most likely to get much better coaching and mentoring from those folks as you go through.
Thank you, everyone.